like to call the meeting to order. If you would stand for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you everyone and welcome. Welcome to everyone watching at home as well. Madam Clerk, if you'd call the roll.
Trustee Carter? Present. Trustee Mariscal?
Present.
Trustee Kazam?
Present.
Trustee Gett?
Present.
Trustee Weisenberg?
Present.
Trustee DeVore?
Present.
All right, everyone's here. That's a good thing. We would be at the approval of the departmental meeting minutes on Tuesday, February 2nd, 2021. I would ask for a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any questions on the motion or questions on the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
Ayes have it. We would be at comments from the audience. Anyone who would like to address the board, please come forward to the podium and give your name and address and try and keep your remarks under 5 minutes. Comments from the audience going once? Twice? Comments are closed. We'll move on to old business. Any old business to come before the board? Hearing none, right into new business. The first is economic development. Trustee Kazam, it's a discussion item, an event request at Tower Park from the Peoria Drum Circle.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't know whether or not Natasha Green is in the audience this evening, but from the literature that we've received, this is a local person who has actually had a drum circle for many years, and she is requesting that we allow the use of Tower Park on the second Friday every month from 6 to 9 through April through October. So I'd like to open this up for discussion. I don't have any reservations about this type of thing. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to get not only spirit, but the pleasure of music into our community. I know that this week we've had conversations with other members or residents in our area who would like to use Tower Park on the first Friday of every month through the summer. So this doesn't seem to conflict with that, but if I'd like to ask my fellow trustees if they can think of anything else that might conflict. That's the only question I have.
Would you like to come to the podium? You're with this group? Would you please come up the podium and tell us a little bit about what you have planned? Then we'll take some questions. Yeah, thank you. And if you speak into the microphone, then everybody at home watching on video can hear you.
Do you want me to just speak about it, or did you have a question?
Go ahead and speak about it.
Okay. Well, this past year with COVID and everything that's been going on, you know, we've been trying to keep this activity to under the 50 participant a maximum that's allowed with the current phase that we're in. So typically this group is around 50 people that will come and you know, play music. I usually invite about 5 artists and vendors to come, again trying to keep it at a minimum. They set up their display and really, you know, it can be 35 to 50 people each time that we meet that just come and go as they please. I'm a music teacher. I started the group because I wanted my students that were taking world drumming in school to be able to have an outlet for what the skills that they were learning. So just like a singer would join a community choir, I wanted them to be able to join a community world drumming group. So that was really how it started, but as of now, it's really something that has grown into art and music and dance, just a lively group of people that have proven to be very responsible and respectful of the space. I facilitate it and oversee it, make sure everything goes smoothly, but for the most part, the participants make it what it is, so it can change from week to week, month to month. We have been at the Forest Park Nature Center up until now, but because of COVID, we needed a bigger, more open space, so I'm
Questions? Anyone have questions or comments? Go right ahead.
Yeah. So is your plan to do it here now, going forward, or is it
So-
moving around, or?
So we'll go back to Forest Park again on the last Friday of the month as we had been, but because people really felt that this space was wonderful, and because it had the space for art and other creatives to come and display their creations, it just would be a shame now to completely abandon it. People loved it so much, so we met probably 10 times last summer, and it was an overwhelming positive response, so.
So has it always been at Forest Park?
The Peoria Art Guild, sometimes the Art Guild will do art. People can come and create things that's through the Peoria Art Guild. Sometimes we've gone to, I mean, we have moved around, but our stable spot has been Forest Park. I bring 25 drums, so people can just come and drum, you know. There's a lot of people now who own their own instruments and things, and they bring those, and so it probably has the potential to outgrow the phase we're in, and I'll have to probably address that when that happens. But as of now, with the amount of people that I invite, it stays right around the size that it needs to be. That said, as soon as COVID's over, it does have the potential to probably get really big.
So this is not just drumline, this is
It's not,
all instruments, talents, if you can sing, and invite all artists to this. And I think this is a great location because, I mean, it's easy to access, and we're right there. And I think it's a great thing that you're doing. As a former,
there are people that come, and like Emma Laley from Peoria Heights here, and Paul Adams from the East Bluff will come and play for a few minutes, but pretty much it's just artists, dancers, flow people that do spin fire and things like that, and then the drummers and hand percussion. So it's really not all music per se, mostly percussion.
So, sorry. We have our the Fine Arts Collaborative, and so since you're working with the Peoria Art Guild, would that be an organization that you'd be willing to work with if this moves forward?
I'm really open to anything. I mean, it starts to lead me at this point. It really does. It's taken off into a life of its own, so I'm open to anything as long as, it's within I don't want to break any rules.
Sure.
Right, yeah.
I think it's a wonderful idea. And,
So do we want to think about this, send it to the full board for final action? Is that?
yeah, I got one more comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think it's a wonderful idea. What I was trying to understand is why it's called Peoria Drum Circle.
Well,
when it's been in the Heights.
it's been in the Heights, right? So originally,
Might be a little petty,
in the way beginning, it started at Bradley Park.
Okay.
Right, so, yeah,
Well, maybe
change it to Central Illinois something, or maybe
Or
Heights.
Peoria.
Peoria Heights.
Peoria Heights Drum Circle,
Just throw that
right.
in there.
Right. Yeah, I've thought about that actually a few times, that
I
it's a
think
little
it's
misleading.
wonderful.
I say send it to the board.
Send it to
Okay.
yeah.
So I'm hearing support, and we all appreciate you bringing this event to Peoria Heights. And it is a little unusual to request so many dates, but I think we'll find a way around that. And if you're able to come back for the next board meeting, we'd appreciate it. And we could even, if you're in a hurry, put you on up at the front of the agenda. Just let me know if you had to leave at that meeting. But thank you so much for being here.
Sure, thank you.
Madam Clerk will put that on then for action at the board meeting.
Correct.
Anything else under economic development, Trustee Kazam?
That's all. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, we'd be at administration. Trustee Gett, there's a discussion item, the first presentation of the 2021-2022 budget. You want to set this up?
I want to make a motion for discussion for the budget for 2021, 2022. I believe Stephanie has a
You have any comments, or?
Well, I do to the fact that it's looking pretty good. We've got a balanced budget, and we got a, correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, $600,000 surplus. If you look at the page 2, all the way down the bottom on the right, it shows all the expenditures for the administration. The biggest increase is for fire protection, and that's because of the 2 new positions. And I think they've done a really, really good job on getting this, a balanced budget and a surplus. Anybody else want to add anything to it, Chief?
First of all, I'd just like to thank Stephanie, the department heads, and also the trustees that I met with in the last few weeks to come to this presentation tonight. It is the first draft of the balanced budget. The surplus that Trustee Gett was referring to is the budget that we're ending in is going to look, we're looking very good at that surplus. That's what he was referring to. Even though this is the first draft, we are looking at a surplus. The revenues are projected, well, we went low on the projections and also high on the expenditures. So as you know, as we move throughout the year, we watch these monthly to make sure we're not overspending beyond our means. So I'm pretty confident in the first draft, very happy with the first draft, but I know we'll have questions. But I do appreciate, again, everybody that I met with over the last few weeks who had questions and concerns. And again, this is your first presentation, so after saying that, I'll turn this over to Stephanie Turner.
Okay, so all of you should have copies of this presentation in front of you to make it a little easier to see, but we'll have it on the board as well. I'm just going to go over it really fast. If you have any questions, we can go over them at the end. First slide is simply an overview to show exactly what all is contained in the budget. It does include a few restricted funds that are not necessarily called out specifically in the budget, but we'll go over those in more detail later. In total, there's approximately $7.8 million in revenue and $7.5 million in expenditures, which means overall the village will have a surplus of over $286,000 at the end of next year. We'll drill down into the general fund since that is the majority of this budget. Just to provide a little context of how the budgeting process has kind of gone over the last 10 years, I've provided the budget and the actuals as well as the cash reserves for 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, current, and then what we're expecting next year. This kind of shows, along with the next graph, which I'm going to put the graph up because it's a little easier than all of those numbers. Essentially, what's kind of happened over the last 10 years is the village had gotten itself into a point where our cash reserves were pretty low. They kind of bounced around for a while over a period of about 8 years or so, 7 years or so, and they slowly were going from around 500,000 up to about $1 million, but within the last 3 years is when the village has really kind of turned things around. The last 3 years we've had surpluses, all of which were over $300,000, and cash reserves have grown to the point now where they're projected to be about $1.9 million at the end of this year. That number is incredibly important. Accounting best practices recommend that the village would have 6 months of expenses on hand, cash on hand in case of any emergencies. 3 is a minimum, and when we got to that point, it was very exciting, but we're about to hit the 6-month mark, which would be $1.8 million in reserves. So, moving on, this is a slide to show the detail of the expenditures and revenues for the general fund budget. As Trustee Gatt and Chief Sutton both mentioned, this year there will be a balanced budget. There's a projected surplus for the next fiscal year of about $5,000, but this year there's a projected surplus of about $360,000. This is the first draft, so obviously the surplus at the end of this year is going to change, but as Chief Sutton said, there will definitely be a surplus at the end of this fiscal year. To get into some of the details, here's a graph to show how we get our funds. We've kind of gone over this a couple of times before, I know. Essentially, the village gets lots of its revenues from sales tax in different forms, either state or home rule, food and beverage as well. This is pretty much exactly the same as last year. The major difference in our revenues for the upcoming fiscal year is we're going to be receiving more funds in intergovernmental agreements. That's going to increase from about 1% of our total revenues to 5%, and that is in large part because of grants that we will be receiving. So that's incredibly exciting. We do also have some additional partnerships with other governmental agencies that will be increasing that amount as well. The breakdown of expenses is almost exactly the same percentages as last year. This is pretty much our standard breakdown of how the departments receive funding. So for administration, they will be receiving approximately 18% of the total expenditures. They are pretty evenly split between payroll, administration, and professional services. A lot of the legal services, economic development, marketing, all fall onto administration, so that's where it spends the majority of its budget.
Quick question.
Yes.
Does the street, is that street and water, right? Is that just public works that you have here? Oh,
No, it's just street.
so water is in?
Water will be separate, yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Yes. Hold on a second, let me get back, because I skipped ahead. Okay, and moving on to the fire budget. Fire is about 8%. That is actually a 1% increase over last year when it was 7%. This is mainly due, as was previously mentioned, to the 2 new positions and the increased costs in payroll that fire will be having next year. They also, one of the other highlights for their particular budget is the turnout gear that Chief Walters had explained needs to be replaced on an annual basis. Police expenses is pretty much mostly payroll. Considering that they have 63% of the total full-time staff for the village, it's honestly impressive that their payroll costs are as low as they are. The other major expense highlighted in police for next budget year would be the purchase of 2 squad cars. For the street budget, they are pretty much right on course with where they were last year. Their main highlights are going to be funding for street maintenance, either street maintenance, street light maintenance, building maintenance to potentially look at doing some work to the roof down at the Public Works Garage, and then there's some increased funding to the parks maintenance budget. Tower Park actually is down a little bit from last year due to the pandemic and kind of the uncertainty of how summer events will be going. We've budgeted funds for summer events, but not as much as normal. So we were able to decrease some of the maintenance costs as well as the event costs for this particular department. Waste disposal expenses are remaining pretty much level at 11% of the total expenditures. This current contract will be up in December of 2023, and I expect that it will remain about 11% of the total expenditures until the end of that contract. The waterworks budget, which is a separate fund, is the next big part of the village's total budget program. This particular department actually has a surplus as well. It's currently projected to end this fiscal year with over $322,000 in surplus, and then it will have a projected surplus next year of $138,000. Part of the reason that water has such a large surplus this year and next year is that it's in the process of saving up for 2 large water main projects. We had budgeted when we looked at the rate increase a year and a half ago, I believe, 2 years ago, that the water department needed to replace 2 water mains to the cost of an estimated $1.5 million. It is currently slightly ahead of track for the necessary cash reserves in order to be able to complete those projects sometime in 2022 and 2023. I provided kind of a context for its budget and its cash reserves as well. You can see in 10 years ago, it also was it was at a point where it was kind of spending and saving in different cycles. About 5 years ago, there were some more larger projects, so the cash reserves gotten down, but you can see over the last 3 years, cash reserves are growing as we have those 2 water main projects identified that we are currently saving up funds in order to be able to afford those. Waterworks revenues are on track and on pace. They're pretty similar to last year. The majority of the funds that the water department receives are sales to residential customers, obviously. Water expenses for this year, the increase that you'll see here, the 2 big increases in the big projects for water are the increase to the equipment and vehicles. I've been informed by the department heads that Public Works is in desperate need of a backhoe. Ideally, that would be split between street and water. Water can afford it at this point, so it is in the water budget. Additionally, there was well maintenance that was supposed to be done in this fiscal year that came in a little bit higher than what was in the budget and what the water company could afford. They did save up funds to apply to this upcoming fiscal year to get that project done. So we have budgeted that back in so that they can get that well maintenance complete. The next slide we have is an overview of all of the village's restricted funds. These are all funds that the village has that have very specific purposes, so the village can only spend them on certain things. The police pension fund is what the village levies for in property taxes in December. It has increased this year somewhat and substantially, and that's in part not necessarily related exactly to the levy, but it's kind of a accounting and budgeting thing that we need to make sure that what we levy is underneath the figure, and so it's higher than normal. That in no way obligates the board to levy any specific number. It's merely a budgeting thing to make sure that there's no problem later on. Motor fuel tax fund, Superintendent Casey had actually spoken about this, I believe, last week or the week before. We have approved a motor fuel tax program that is slightly more than what we planned to bring in revenues. That was in part because this current fiscal year was actually underspent in order to save up funds to do a larger program in the next fiscal year. There are sufficient cash reserves on hand to pay for that, and that project will in no way put the village in any sort of problematic position. Business Development District funds, that is reported both BDDs together. Both funds have funds allocated for beautification grant programs next year, as well as some funds allocated in BDD number 2 for a residential program. The TIF funds are not actually within the budget. We don't have to budget for them necessarily because the TIF ordinances that were approved essentially approve a budget over the lifetime of the TIF. I do like to include them so that the board is aware of what's kind of going on with them, and so there are rough estimates of the revenues for the TIF funds for next year, as well as the transfers that are necessary through economic development agreements that will go out. There will probably be a surplus of, I'm estimating, around $150,000 to $175,000 in the TIF funds next year. Special service areas, this is what we call all of our economic development agreements. Essentially, those are come in, come out. So any revenues that are received in under there will be paid out to those developers. And then anything that is remaining from those particular agreements, that is the village's portion, will be transferred to the general fund and reported in there. INF, this is one of the few funds that has a deficit, and the reason for that is, again, an accounting purpose. INF is the Infrastructure Maintenance Fund. It is a fund specifically for water to allow it to do large infrastructure projects. We typically allow those funds to accumulate until there's either an emergency or an appropriate project identified. At this point, there is not a project that has been identified for that, and the funds are accumulating somewhat slowly because we have dedicated most of them to the $1.5 million loan that water took out in order to rehabilitate the towers, as well as do, I believe, some pump maintenance and some other projects. Because it's accumulating so slowly and because we're never quite entirely sure what sort of emergencies or projects might come up, we always budget that that account will be drawn down to zero in the upcoming fiscal year. At no point would staff make any recommendation to actually do that. It's a budgeting technique, essentially, that if we needed to do so, we could spend those funds without having to open the budget back up and go an extra step, essentially. So it's basically to save us some housekeeping in the future, should we need it. And finally, there's the service deposit fund. This is similar to some of our other funds, like the police pension, where essentially the money that comes in goes right back out. This is simply the account, or the money that we bring in for water accounts to hold on file until the house is sold. Motor fuel tax fund, I've provided a chart to kind of show exactly where this fund will be spent. You can see that the majority of the funds for next year will be spent in seal coating, which is because we are doing a much larger project than normal. Business development, you can see that the majority, 41% of this particular fund, are going towards matching grants for the businesses for a total of $130,000 between the two business development districts. There's also $30,000 budgeted for the residential housing program. And finally, for the INF, as we discussed, that is simply a matter of drawing that account down to zero in case the village identifies a project that it wishes to spend those funds on. If it did decide to do so, there's currently anticipated to be about $125,000 in unallocated funds in the INF that might be available next year. And that is the overview of the budget.
Thank you very much,
So we're
Stephanie.
open for questions or comments?
I just gotta say, good work. I appreciate all the hard work you ladies have done. Does anybody else want to add anything else to this?
I do. Go ahead.
You go first.
Okay, Stephanie, on page 17 of the budgeted worksheets, on the bottom, under infrastructure costs and infrastructure maintenance, we have, in like the reference notes, it says $125,000 for a loan, $100,000 in reserves. Is this what we're putting away to save for these major projects? Is that what that is explaining there?
Yes, and actually, so it says $100,000 in reserve, and that was a typo. It should be $125 that's in reserves.
Okay, so 125 for the loan and 125 for the reserve?
Yes, which it's important to note that 125 is going to be at the end of the fiscal year, which that's part of why we would never actually draw it down to zero. It's because since we're always getting that money in, we're never going to hit that 125 until probably April 30th.
Right, because the whole goal is to continue to save, right?
Yes.
So that we can do
Yes.
some of these major projects
Yes.
that need to be done instead of constantly taking out loans and
Correct.
having our residents have to pay the INF,
Yes,
right?
yes, and the other thing that I would mention is I don't think there was ever an intention, because water mains are so expensive, I don't know that the intention was ever to literally save up $1 million in INF. This was more for things like pressure reducing valves, projects that were more in the $50,000 to $125,000 range, or maybe slightly higher than that, simply because it would take a really long time for us to build up enough funds to be able to pay for a water main out of this particular fund.
I understand, it was more just like having money in there so when some of these things do go wrong, we can start addressing them, or if like a road,
Correct.
like one road needs all new piping, we can do, whatever.
Yes,
I-
you perfectly understand,
Okay.
trusted board.
My next thing is there a way, so since we are operating in more of a balanced budget and we have a little bit of a surplus, is there a way to start a savings like this for the street department so that we can start addressing future needs for curbs and sidewalks?
Like a capital.
A capital fund?
So just like the same, like we're putting this money aside, so that we have money to do these big projects. But, before we used to have this curb and sidewalk plan and now we don't.
Yeah.
Since we are I understand that it's so expensive to do it, right?
Correct.
But if we could start working towards saving money that's allocated to that?
Yes.
Is there a way to do that?
So if you actually look on page 14, there is a...
Which one?
Oh, sorry, page 14 of the budget worksheets.
Okay.
And it's underneath the police pension tax levy fund. There is a capital improvement fund that we used to have. It has not been funded for a long period of time, but if the board were to identify an amount that they wanted to make a transfer out of the general fund into that fund, then that would be something that we could do. The INF was a little bit easier mechanism because it was a specific revenue source that we could identify and then immediately transfer. We don't have to have that for the general fund, but it did make it a lot easier to say these particular funds are immediately transferred over to this fund for infrastructure.
I mean, I understand that this amount of money will not do an entire block of curbs and sidewalks, but I would like to see us, if everybody's in agreement, at least put $50,000 into this account every year that we have a balanced budget or have a surplus so that we can start doing this while we're looking for grants or doing these neighborhood things or whatever. These neighborhood grants, in the meantime, we could be saving to do some of these curbs and sidewalks. That's all I have.
Trustee Weisenberg, go ahead, you're next.
Thanks, Mayor. Are we budgeting next year to bring the well online that's off Gardner Lane? Because I know Marfell did some kind of test or did some kind of survey on it.
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Are we bringing
The
that?
one that she was explaining ended up being a little bit more than we had budgeted, so we're saving some of that and putting it in next year's budget to get that done.
Okay, so we're going to bring it online next year?
On page 15.
That's awesome.
See how it says on the side, well number 1280,000?
I see that. And I'll just echo what Trustee DeVore said. We have to start working on the village infrastructure. We stress to homeowners, you have to keep up your property and invest in your property, and it's kind of hard to tell them that when we're not making any investments in our infrastructure. So I would love to see us start to fund the capital improvement fund just for those little projects, so we can do a few little things every year. Small improvements add up to big improvements, especially with sidewalks and streets and parks.
Well, you're bringing up some issues and items that are, I think, very important to all of us, but especially you and I have talked about those a lot. I think we're getting ourselves, because of being good fiscal stewards, we're getting ourselves into a position where we can start talking about more of those items like a sidewalk program or doing more improvement to the water infrastructure, et cetera. That's part of one of the reasons I've talked to a lot of you about this strategic planning session, where terrific job on the budget and we understand it. But I think us as policymakers need to identify some bigger capital projects that are 4 and 5 years out that we want to start telling the administration, these are our top priorities. So I think we'll get there and we're on our way. But I agree with you, Trustee Weisenberg.
I think it's a good idea to set back some money for this. A few years back, we had a curbs and sidewalks program, and a lot of times we took care of the places that was what we could afford.
Right.
And we would like to, I would love to be able to put curbs and sidewalks all over, but it's not cheap. If we could save the money back and put it in a fund with draws interest and creates, that'd be great. That'd be fantastic.
If we reserve the money to put in this capital fund, though, we don't have to decide to, right away what we're using it for, right? It's just that we're reserving it for capital improvements.
Yes.
Okay.
That's, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Just earmark it.
yes, it would be earmarked elsewhere. It would remain within the general fund, but it would be reported separately is what I would do with it. And then it would take board action essentially to transfer the funds to whatever project the board decided, or if things were bad, back to the general fund.
Okay.
So the infrastructure that we put on the water bill, that's strictly for infrastructure for water? or
That's
water
correct.
mains? Okay.
It's not for
We can't use
streets.
it for, that's right, I just want to make that clear. We can't use it for anything else but water.
I just think we need like something separate like that, right?
Yeah.
Like, keep doing this to pay for water, but let's do more to pay for other things.
Yep.
Anyone else who hasn't spoken yet? Anyone on the phone? Trustee Marskel or Trustee Kazam, any comments?
No, thank you. I think my fellow trustees have asked questions that I was thinking of as well, so thank you. Very well done, Stephanie.
Thank you, Trustee Kazam.
Okay, and again, this is a draft, so if you have any further thoughts or questions, please direct them to the administrator.
Drives me nuts.
Okay, we would be,
I'm sorry,
Trustee
one more.
Gett, anything
One
else?
more,
Oh,
Mayor. So are we talking about, can I just make sure, just a question, the two ladies that we had for the Tower Park, are they budgeted in this?
The groundskeepers?
Yes.
Yes, they
Where
are.
are they at?
They are actually split. If you look under the street department, there is a new line item. Kevin, what is the number that I put on that? It is 6016. It is the third from the top. Partially, some of the funds will come out of there, and then also it is underneath tower as well.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
anything else? Okay, we would, Trustee Gett, anything else under administration?
That's all I have.
Chief Sutton? Okay. Any miscellaneous business come before the board? Hearing none, we do have an executive session on personnel 5 ILCS 120/2C1. I would ask for a motion to go into executive session for that reason.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on that motion? Madam Clerk, call the roll.
Trustee Carter?
Present.
I,
sorry.
okay. Trustee Mariscal?
Aye.
Trustee Kazam?
Aye.
Trustee Gett?
Aye.
Trustee Weisenberg?
Aye.
Trustee DeVore?
Aye.
All right, so we are adjourning to executive session. We will come back only to adjourn and not to conduct any business.
We're back from executive session. Is there any other business to go before the board? I look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Got a motion from trustee Weisenberg,
Second.
second from trustee DeVore.
All in favor?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? No, okay, it passes. Meeting adjourned.
All right. Where's your gavel, Jeff?
It's right here.
All right.